Is it time to panic in Toronto? Will we see some major changes coming up after a really slow start and some losses to some low-ranking teams? A trip to California has not served the Leafs well and are coming back now with a lot of people asking questions. So we'll discuss that scenario. Plus, we have news from the NHL waiver wire, some NHL injuries, a signing, big news out of Vancouver, and I want to discuss Shea Wright as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Leafs here and some potential changes that may or may not happen after a slow start to the season, but we do have some other news to get into here first. Now let's first start with the NHL waiver wire. Nothing real big happening on there today. We had Riley Sheehan on waivers yesterday from the Buffalo Sabres. We found out today that he indeed did clear, and he has been reassigned to their American Hockey League affiliate. Nothing new on waivers here for today. We do have a signing in Dallas, which is a result of the Jake Ottinger injury. We found out that Ottinger is going to be out for at least a week, maybe a little bit further. He's going to be reevaluated in a week's time, so most likely will be a bit longer than that. But they signed goaltender Matt Murray to a one-year ELC. Now, of course, this is not the same Matt Murray who is currently on injured reserve with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Just a coincidence he has the same name, but he is a 5-year college hockey veteran who played at UMass Amherst and has recently joined the Dallas Stars American Hockey League affiliate. This is his first NHL contract, so otherwise he wouldn't have been eligible to be called up because he didn't have a two-way contract. So he gets a one-year ELC, which makes him eligible. And like I said, due to Ottinger's injury, they need to be able to have some roster flexibility. So he needs to be upgraded on his contract status. And obviously they're pleased enough with him so far in his limited time there to make that decision. So Matt Murray becomes another goaltender here for the Dallas Stars. On to some other injury updates around the league. The Nashville Predators, as I mentioned, finally placed Mark Borowski officially on injured reserve and have recalled defenseman Jordan Gross. The Capitals announced that TJ Oshie is going to be out indefinitely with a lower body injury. That's bad news for the Caps. I believe John Carlson's also going to be out for a while. So that's a team that's already banged up, and they lose two more very important players. That's a team that's older and beaten up and injured a lot and dealing with some long-term stuff as well with a guy like Nicholas Backstrom, who they're hoping to get back this year, but no real clear-cut decision or answers there yet. A little bit early for that. So this team is going to possibly, be in trouble here, I think, in the short term with the amount of injuries they have. We'll see if they can fight through the adversity and stay in the playoff race, but it's not going to be easy considering the players they are now without. The Anaheim Ducks also announced they're going to be without young defenseman Jamie Drysdale. He's going to be out for upwards of 6 months. It could be a little bit sooner, but unfortunately he suffered a torn labrum and requires shoulder surgery. So the Ducks, of course, had a big win over the Leafs last night, which has kind of caused part of the issues here. We're talking about the Leafs, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But Drysdale himself, it's unfortunate because they have such a young group of players that are going to be leading this team for some time, and it's a pretty serious injury. He's a key part of the future on the black and on the blue line, so he might be done for the season. It really depends, but he could maybe get lucky if he can recover in time to get a few games in at the end of the season. The Vancouver Canucks had scheduled what they called a major news press conference for earlier today. Wasn't sure what kind of announcement we were getting, but it was clear from the get-go based on reports from NHL insiders that it had nothing to do with a contract signing of some speculate maybe it's a Bo Horvat contract extension, maybe it's a coaching change, like what is it? And we found out pretty quick last night that it had nothing to do with that, and it was more on the business side of things. And now we know that the Vancouver Canucks have signed a 10-year contract extension with Rogers as the arena naming rights holder. So we know they have that already in place. Of course, they'll continue to hold that spot, and obviously that's a good money-making part of the business on the Canucks side. And they've also continued with their exclusive regional TV and radio broadcast partner as Rogers as well. So certainly, it's important news. I guess depending on how you look at things as a fan, some fans don't see those types of things as being too important, but it is important when it comes to the financial side of things for the team, as well as your TV and radio broadcasting rights. So certainly pretty good news there for Vancouver. No changes, just to kind of keep things going where it is. And Shane Wright is getting a lot of attention. A lot of people are talking about the fact that it doesn't seem to make sense with how the Kraken are handling his development. Of course, he was drafted 4th overall. Many feel the main reason why he went from 1st to 4th on many teams' draft lists that were near the top of the draft and ended up going 4th instead of 1st was the fact that when the OHL was shut down during the pandemic, he didn't get an opportunity, or didn't find an opportunity, I should say, to go play hockey overseas, and he's missed a ton of time. This guy is obviously extremely talented and should have a very bright future and hopefully a really solid NHL career ahead of him. But you have to think that with all the amount of hockey that he missed, and the fact that he didn't go overseas like a lot of other people and players did, that a lot of teams certainly had concerns over that. And now the fact here is that he's made the Kraken roster at a training camp, but he's either playing 4th line minutes and not even as much as some 4th liners. He's getting an average of less than 7 minutes a game, and then he's also been healthy scratched a bunch of times. I just don't see how this is helping his development at all. Now, the problem is as well, which I heard Jeff Merrick talking about on the 32 Thoughts podcast, is that they might be looking at his OHL team in Kitchener and feel like it's maybe not the greatest plan to send him back there. But he feels that maybe there's a possibility if the Kraken talk to the Kitchener Rangers, and not only the Kraken, but maybe Shane Wright's representatives, and maybe they find a way to get him traded onto one of the more powerful teams in the Ontario Hockey League, so that he'll have more of a chance to make the OHL playoffs, maybe make it to the Memorial Cup, and things like that. The other possibility is that the Kraken hang on to him for a little bit longer and maybe release him to go to the World Junior Championships to represent Team Canada, and then maybe he finishes a year in junior after that. But you just got to say, the guy, like I said, he's missed so much hockey. I don't see the point. If you can't play him in an offensive role, and he's only going to get 6 or 7 minutes a night, I don't see how that's helping him at all. I also don't see how it's helping him being in a healthy scratch. To me, I said before the season ever started that I wouldn't be surprised if either all or at least majority of these high-picked players from the 2022 NHL draft, a lot of them could benefit from more time in junior or the American Hockey League, depending on where they're from. Of course, the European-born players that went high in the draft, they have the option to go to the AHL, whereas the Canadian-born players that play in the Canadian Junior Hockey League, they don't have that opportunity because of the agreement between the NHL and the CHL. And, as much as you may or may not agree with that policy, it's not going to change anytime soon. I mean, the NHL recognizes the CHL as being its largest producer of hockey talent, and they're not going to, rock the boat too hard with that. It makes sense in a lot of ways as well. But I wonder if they can eventually maybe work in a few exceptions for the odd highly drafted player who might be able to benefit from it, as opposed to the average player who could certainly be better off playing in junior, longer after they're drafted for an extra 1 or 2 seasons, depending on exactly their age and eligibility. But for Shane Wright, you got to wonder what's going on, if this is not good for his development, and see what happens here. What are your thoughts on Wright? Should he be sent back to junior? Should he be playing more with the Kraken? You have to think that sitting and not playing much when he is in the lineup is doing him a complete disservice to his hockey development here, and I would hope that it wouldn't have too much of an impact down the road, but just something has to give here on that front as well. Now, on to the Maple Leafs. Now, of course, the Maple Leafs have had a Western road trip, which started in Winnipeg with an actual win, and then they've lost the past 4 games. Now, a couple of those losses came in overtime, so they did garner a point, but in a 4-game streak there that happened after the Winnipeg game, obviously they could have earned as many as 8 points. They've only earned 2, and as the road trip went on, it seemed to get worse. The loss in Anaheim last night was arguably the worst of the bunch. Anaheim has been dead last in the league. They had a 2-goal lead going into the third period, and they managed to blow it. The Leafs even had help, in my opinion, from the officials or the league, however you want to look at it, because the Ducks did score the go-ahead goal in regulation later in the third period. The goal was called back for goalie interference, and I know that there's always a debate on what goalie interference is, because it seems to be terribly inconsistent at times. But on that call, to me, I don't see any way, shape, or form how that was goalie interference. I personally think the goal should have counted. I know I've heard a lot of other people say that as well. And really, I think the Leafs got lucky. and then they still couldn't overcome it, losing overtime off a Trevor Zegras goal. And it's just, it got bad to worse. They took a timeout when they were leading. You could see Sheldon Keefe talking to the team, and he even called out Mitch Marner on the bench. You could make out from the cameras, from the TV cameras, you could read his lips saying how there was a couple of goals on Mitch. A lot of people don't think he should have done that, mainly because of how Marner reacts. As we've heard Elliot Friedman and some other reporters talk, some of the guys on the Leafs can take criticism and pressure, and it just seems to roll right off them, and it doesn't really matter too much. Like Matthews seems to handle things pretty well. Doesn't seem like a whole lot bothers him. Nylander, I don't think really bothers him much at all. I know that there are times when he drives the fans a little bit crazy as well. There's sometimes when you see like a puck going into a corner and he just won't go battle for it at times. That does drive everybody a little bit batty. But for the most part, like it just doesn't seem like when he gets criticism or whatever, it just seems like he just doesn't give a crap about anything. That's how his persona comes off, at least when you see him in public and talking in interviews. But Marner, on the other hand, you can tell that based on how he reacts, and I know this is Friedman's opinion, and I do agree with it. Some people might disagree, but I think it's pretty obvious myself that Mitch Marner is a great hockey player, doesn't seem to respond well to pressure or being called out. That's part of what made the relationship with Mike Babcock go bad. There were multiple things that happened there, but it just seems like calling Mitch out or giving him criticism that becomes public, it really seems to bother him. I mean, we've seen a case last night where he was benched. Obviously, he was, like I said, called out on the bench during the timeout by the coach. He later goes down the tunnel. Looks like he had a bit of a hissy fit, smashing a stick, and then it comes back. And even after sitting for a while, you think he's benched. You think his night's probably over. But then Keith throws him back out in overtime. And, I'm not saying it was his fault on the overtime winner, but they ended up losing the game. So it just seems like, you're yelling at Mitch, telling him that it's your fault here that we gave up a couple of goals. I'm benching you, which, like I said, doesn't seem like it went over well. I know I've seen a lot of reporters saying that, it could be a major downfall because if you look at it from a risk-reward standpoint and based on how Marner's going to react to this, look at the other time we've seen Keith call out some players and his elite players in the media, and then he walks it back. A lot of people thought he walked it back because of a reaction to those comments by players like Mitch Marner. Now, I don't know if that's the case or not, but either way, something's got to give here. I see, if you look at social media and all these articles that are being written here since this latest loss, there's a variety of opinions out there, and that's what I want to talk about is what should they do. There's some that feel a big trade needs to come. Some feel like changing coach needs to come. So I've seen people saying that Dubas needs to go, Shanahan needs to go, Keefe needs to go, we need a clean slate. And I tell you, they got to tread carefully here because the one thing that they don't want to see happen, and this is down the road a ways, but it's on the path going down there, is to lose Austin Matthews as a free agent for nothing. A lot of people don't seem to understand that the Matthews contract is such a big piece of the future puzzle of this team. He's still 2 years away, counting this season, from hitting UFA status. But at the end of this season, going into the offseason next summer, is when they can sign him to a mega extension if he'll agree to it and sign and stay. If he doesn't want to, or there's talks of, well, we want to hold off and wait, that's not going to sit well with the fan base. And the panic button is going to be pressed pretty quickly once Matthews is eligible and until something is done. And that's just the way things go, right? And if Matthews is even thinking about leaving, that's terrible news. I mean, imagine if they make a trade or two now and try to shake things up and then they lose him. Like, that's going to be a major setback. He is one of the league's top players, a 60-goal man last year. If they were to give Matthews the contract that they gave him and then walk him to free agency at a young age and lose him, that would be such a terrible big blow. I mean, there's some people that feel that his relationship with Dubas could play an impact on his future decision as well. So if the Leafs decided, for example, to clean house, that might have a big impact on Matthews' decision when his contract is due, because it's not all that far away. And if they don't have the success this year to take a big step forward, like I said, this year is pivotal. I've been saying it for a while, and I'm not sure that a lot of people really understand how important it is for them to have the success this year and to get into playoffs again and to at least win a couple of rounds. Even if they don't win a cup, they got to take a big step forward and get closer to make sure that a guy like Matthews wants to stay. But at the end of the day, you have to think that there could be changes coming soon. But I will say this, based on looking at last year, we saw a similar start when it comes to the records. Now, the only difference is you look at things, it's not so much the record after 9 or 10 games, it's how they got there, the teams they lost to. We've seen the Leafs lose against teams like the Habs, who, yes, it was early in the season and expected to be a bottom dweller. They've done a little bit better than I think most expected. So, there's that. The Coyotes, who at the time was near the bottom of the standings, come into Toronto and beat them. They lost against the Sharks and the Ducks, two of the league's worst teams. The Kings, obviously a little bit stronger team, but still not exactly like they're near the top of the league either. They've had a bit of a rough start themselves, and they absolutely go through California. And it's just not the old days when California trip was like dreaded and you knew that you weren't getting many points coming through there. Teams usually like going to California now because those teams are not like they were 10 years ago, and you can go out there and get at least a couple of wins and feel good about your team getting through a remotely successful road trip. But at the end of the day, Justin Hall is getting a lot of criticism. He's obviously having a really rough go right now. They don't have much in the way of right shot defensemen, so even replacing him is a challenge. You could even hear on the cameras as well, Marner yelling at Hall when he messed up getting the puck out. So you got to think that it's because I've seen Marner use this in his interviews after the game, saying that we started the same similar record last year. And in fact, I think he said they were way worse, which I don't agree with. We figured it out. We still have high confidence. We're gonna go home after this trip, and we're gonna we're still gonna be confident. We're gonna get everything figured out and move on. And they still could do that. It's early. All the Leafs need to do, if they go on a little winning streak here, 2 or 3 games, they're going to be feeling a lot better about themselves. Their record's going to start going back above 500 again, and all the noise is going to go away. It's just that simple. That's how it works in the NHL. It's early, and a lot of fan bases, reporters, and media like to overreact. That just seems to be the trend that we see in all kinds of markets, especially in big hot markets like Toronto, Vancouver, New York, the bigger ones where there's a lot more focus and attention on the product on the ice here. But at the end of the day, like I said, you gotta wonder what's coming. And obviously the relationship between Sheldon Keefe and Mitch Marner is definitely a concern at this point. Looking, as I said, what happened between Marner and Babcock, and I know there was a little bit more to that story, and I know there were some things that happened behind closed doors that we didn't find out about until after. But still, when you call out Marner, it seems like the beginning of the end for Babcock. So could it be the same in the case of Sheldon Keefe? I don't want to think that's the case. I'd be shocked if Kyle Dubas fired Keefe. I honestly think he'll ride with him right till the end here, and if anything, they'll maybe make a trade or two. I know I've heard some people say like Alex Kerfoot's another player that could be moved. Not that he's doing absolutely terrible or anything like that. They just seem to have a difficult time finding a regular spot for him in the lineup. And for a guy who's making like $3.5 million, that's a player that you need to have a solid, consistent role for. And so maybe he becomes a move. Like we know Hall has been struggling hardcore. So like I said, I think that's holding things off on that front right now. It's like the fact that they don't have another righty that they can put out there. You get guys playing on their weak sides. But maybe if they were able to trade Hall, could they get another right-handed D to come back that maybe works out better? I don't know. But there's certainly some, the top names out there that we're seeing. Like, I don't know if we'll see a Marner trade. I don't think we're going to see anything that drastic. But when we know that it's fair to say that the pressure is ramped up really high right now in Leafland, I think Kyle Dubas, Sheldon Keefe are all feeling it. There's no doubt. I think the players are feeling it. And just the way things have gone down, we've seen Sheldon Keefe try a variety of things. Like I said, he's called out his elite players as a group. He's walked it back. He's calling out players on the bench, trying to send a message to his team that if I'm willing to bench Mitch Marner, who plays in all situations, is usually the highest minute muncher amongst all the forwards. If I'm going to sit him down because of poor play, that it's a clear signal that I will do that with anybody and everybody. They've got a bottom six that they cannot really find the right balance for. They've got enough players for different mixes, and it's same as last year. They just can't seem to find the right supporting cast amongst the bottom six. They bring in all these players year after year. These guys have had, for the most part, some of these guys have had good track records. Some of them are a little bit of a gamble. And it's not working out. And it's unfortunate because when you look at a lot of the players that they've moved out in the last 2, 3, 4 years that they couldn't keep because of the cap and all the money tied up in the other guys, some of those guys are the kind of players you'd like to have. Like when they moved on from guys like Nazem Kadri and Connor Brown and Mikheyev and all these guys, Hyman's another one. Like, I understand they kind of, in some ways, have replacement players for some of those guys, so to speak. Like Bunting replaced Hyman. I think that was a good move. They're going to have to figure out a way to pay Bunting, obviously, coming up soon as well. That's another issue, but I think he's a guy that's, definitely I don't see Bunting being a guy that they would consider moving. But you would think, though, if it comes down to it, Dubas has gone to bat for this core group of players for quite some time. It's not like they've been there a short time. Most of these guys, like the guys that you consider the core that they drafted and developed, have been there for like 6-7 years now. Tavares has been there for a while. And you have to think that I do wonder, based on contracts, I don't think Tavares has a full no move, and I don't think, so he's not going anywhere. Matthews is by far the team's best player, pure goal scorer. I think they would want to lock him up at all costs. And to be honest, I think Nylander's contract has more value to it than Marner's, considering the big difference in income and what the AAV is on each one. I do honestly wonder if they did decide, and I'm not saying they have because there's no information to suggest that, but if the Leafs decided that they were going to do something significant and one of those big contracts were going to go, I think it would be Marner. And wouldn't it not make sense if you're going to move a guy like that to bring in some real solid combination, because he's a big enough point producer and top offensive player. They might be able to get a really solid top D and maybe some other pieces that could help the bottom six and really get a good return. I mean, look at the return that Brad Treliving got on Matthew Tkachuk in Calgary. I'm not suggesting he's going to get that exact same kind of deal, but he got a top playmaking forward and a top pair defenseman. So if you start shopping Marner for a similar type of return, that would be absolutely phenomenal for the team. So hard to say if something like that happens, but it sure sounds like the pressure is mounted. They're ready to hit the panic button. I don't know. They're going to be home to Philadelphia here in a short time. If they lose that game, all bets are off. I don't think things are going to happen here too quickly, but it's a matter of time if these losses don't stop before we see something drastic in Leafland. But what do you think is the most likely scenario that happens first? Do you think Keefe gets fired? Do you think Keefe and Dubas and Shanahan could all get fired, or any combination of that? Or do you think they'll try to make a big trade and make roster adjustments to go that way to kind of make sure that they can get this team back on track so that these guys that are in charge can maybe try to keep their jobs? What do you think happens first? Let me know down in the comments. We'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.